Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and I reject your podcast and I substitute my own. And I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. And is there any 6'8" maniacal demon across the screen from me here who wants to take this journey as well?
Well, absolutely. That's me. Everyone would describe me in exactly that way. My name is Steve Guntley, coming to you from Austin, Texas, and this is the podcast about frozen werewolves, animated dragons, and rat spit. That's because this is the podcast about the Dungeonmaster. It's an early Empire anthology film that is kind of like the text for all future full moon movies in a strange way. One that marks the first time that Charles Band would work with a lot of his most impactful collaborators. And this is a very, very exciting episode for us because we're actually recording today with one of those collaborators, one of the people very intimately involved with this movie. And I cannot wait to get into it. Jared, who's here with us today?
Yeah, this is super exciting because this is a person who you probably know if you're a fan of Band and a fan of Empire and Full Moon stuff from a number of projects, including the one that we're going to talk about, plus the Resonator movies, Miskatonic U, all the Bill Butler stuff from the more recent years, which we'll be getting to eventually on the show also. And I'm super excited to be covering all that stuff in the future. But more importantly, he was the lead of the movie that we're talking about today. So I'm talking about this self-proclaimed Lord Byron, Jeffrey Byron. Jeffrey, how are you, man? Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for adding the Lord part, because
of course
people, miss that. I'm good. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here. And thanks so much, Jared and Steve, for having me. And let's jump on in. Ask me anything you want to ask me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're gonna definitely have a lot to go over because this movie was this was a first time watch for me, and all I kept thinking was like, had I seen this when I was a little younger, this absolutely would have been my favorite movie, because this is hitting so many of the boxes that like a younger me would be really excited about. In the best way, this movie kind of feels like a kid playing with action figures and kind of imagining new different worlds. Like even to the degree, like I used to freeze my Ninja Turtles so that like others could come in and like, oh, a frozen ice gallery. Like I need to save them. Like it's got that level of kind of freewheeling fun to it that I just absolutely loved. And I was so charmed by this movie.
Steve, I think I am in complete agreement with you. This was a first time watch for me, although I was familiar a bit with the movie on reputation. I had heard the name of the movie. I knew Richard Mullet was in it, and I was a kid who loved Night Court and loved Bull. And so I remember that specifically about it. And I remember that it was an anthology series, but I think the name Dungeonmaster, at least the title that it was released under, Dungeonmaster, as opposed to Rage War, which was the original title. I knew the movie by name, but I sort of in my brain, I think, lumped it in with some sword and sorcery type movies of the time, which it doesn't really mesh so much with a lot of those. It's definitely closer
flavors
in spirit,
of that,
flavors, but it's closer in spirit to me to something like Tron, with all the computer stuff. But I totally agree with you. I was watching it and thinking, I've done some reading about this movie. I've watched the movie now. I've watched special features. And the one lingering thought that I was having was like, I wish I saw this when I was young. Like, I wish I had seen it, and I had not. So, Jeffrey, maybe this is as good a time as any you are the star of this movie. And this was, I think, your second time working with and for Charles Band as Empire was beginning to form. So tell us a little bit about like your foray into acting and how you found your way to Charles Band and some of these movies we're covering.
Yeah, well, I met Charlie initially when he was making this movie Metal Storm. And, I had already had a reasonably established career. I'd done a number of films and lots of television. And the casting director of Metal Storm was this fantastic woman named Joanna Ray. And Joanna Ray went on to do all the David Lynch films, and she's legendary in her own right. And I knew Joanna my entire life. Joanna actually was my babysitter.
Oh wow.
So my mother was this very famous English actress named Anna Lee, who made over 100 films and was in 9 John Ford films.
Oh wow.
More than anybody but John Wayne. And because of their long-standing relationship, when I was born, John Ford was my godfather. And
Oh my God.
and so so I knew Joanna from the time I was a child, and then all those years later, after I had already started and had sort of established myself, I believe I was 27. I'm brought in for this movie called Metal Storm, and I was the very first actor that they saw for the film. Like not only the first actor for that role, but the first actor for any role.
Oh wow.
And it was a Friday afternoon, and I went to the offices of Empire, which was on Fairfax Boulevard, and had a really good meeting, and read for them. And this is obviously long before cell phones, etc. And after the meeting, I drove home, and it took me about 25-30 minutes to get home in LA Friday afternoon traffic. And by the time I got home, I mean, literally, when I walked in the door, my phone rang, and my agent said, they want you. They're going to hire you. And so they never saw another actor for that part. I was the one and only actor they saw.
Amazing.
And then we then Charlie, this is Charlie Band's style. This is a good thing for your audience to know. Charlie is a very collaborative guy, and he's great that way. And so Charlie, in a weird sort of a way, almost made me kind of like a partner on the movie. So I was involved in all the other casting. And so when we were looking for, the female lead who would play opposite me, I was there every day reading with all these different actresses. And of course, a lot of them went on to become really famous. Obviously, the incredible, God rest her soul, Kelly Preston got the part. But, that part was actually originally meant for Demi Moore. And because Charlie did a movie with her called Parasite. And
yes, that's right.
Or was it Parasite, or was it?
No, it was Parasite.
Okay.
3D.
And then the other actress, and I've got to look her up. Her first name is Alexandra. She eventually became a big star on Baywatch, but she was a very well-known actress of that time. And she also
the name's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah.
Alexandra Paul.
Yeah,
Alexandra Paul. That's it. That's it.
So those were the 3 big names, and there were other really terrific actresses that that read for that part. But anyway, Kelly eventually got the part. A quick note on Richard Mull, which will connect the dots to the Dungeonmaster. Richard obviously was also in Metal Storm.
Yeah.
And Charlie, when he hired Richard, begged him, I need you to shave your head. And he was very resistant to shave his head. Like, well, wait a second, I'm a working actor and I've got all this other stuff going on. But finally, he agreed to do it. And then during the filming of Metal Storm, Richard gets the audition for Night Court and ends up getting the job. And that is why he was bald on Night Court.
Oh my God.
That's amazing, because watching Dungeonmaster, I was like, I can't get over Richard Mull with hair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It became so much part of his iconic kind of look. Yeah.
Yeah. So he, he had, he was like a cyclops, and but he was bald underneath. I mean, he had to do that for the makeup. So anyway, that's the story there. But anyway, I ended up doing Metal Storm with Charlie, and we have a really good time. And that was a great time in my life. That was a lot of fun to make. And I got to, and a lot of the, the people that were on Metal Storm ended up being on the Dungeonmaster. John Beegler did all the special effects and so on and so forth. So we wrap Metal Storm on a Friday night at like 10:30 in the evening, and then at 6 o'clock the next morning we start the Dungeonmaster.
Oh, wow.
So I had been offered the Dungeonmaster about halfway through my tenure on Metal Storm. You know, Charlie said, you know, I got this really cool thing. It's called Rage War. And then in typical Charles Band style, he showed me a poster. Like this was the way this is what he did from the ground up. It always started with artwork first.
Yeah.
So he would go, he's a very clever guy. He would go to, you know, the Cannes Film Festival, and he'd spend, even though obviously, you know, Charlie's movies, like a lot of lower budget movies, don't, you know, there's not a lot of money there, but he would spend his money on the artwork, and he would create this great visual medium, and then he would take it to Cannes, and he'd kind of pretend that the movie was already in production when it wasn't, and that's where he'd get the money to make the movie. So he did all this artwork on Rage War, and he used my image in the artwork, and so on and so forth. So that's how we began. We literally started, even while we were making Metal Storm. The wonderful costume designer Kathy, whose name I can't remember her last name, but anyway, Kathy was amazing. She was the one that created that whole look for me in Metal Storm, the black leather, the whole thing. But while I was making Metal Storm, they were fitting me for what I was going to wear on the Dungeonmaster, and she created that kind of thing that I wore. That thing is probably the best way to.
I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say she was fitting you for those red shorts.
So, exactly. So, but anyway, so we started the Dungeonmaster the very next day, and the very, very first sequence we made was the dream sequence at the very beginning of the film, which was all shot down in, it was in San Pedro, and it was an old abandoned military facility. And of course, the great Mac Allberg, you know, made it look sensational. And then we went from there. And then obviously the big point of the Dungeonmaster, as you both pointed out, it's an anthology, and it's all these different stories. And while Charlie was coming up with those concepts, and he was obviously deciding on who was going to direct them, and of course he had a lot of in-house people that he was giving opportunities to, he very generously asked me if I would like to write one of them, so I did. And then I asked him, could I hire my brother to direct it? And my brother was already an established director. My brother was directing a lot of television and movies of the week, etc. And my brother very graciously said, yeah, I'll direct it. So that was a great opportunity for me, not just to act, but also to write something. And you know, again, this goes back to the theme, which is that Charles Band is great with collaboration. He has no ego. He really pushes people forward, which I think is a great quality. And he really is. He's a remarkable person. I mean, when you consider the longevity and how many movies he's made, that is incredible. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, we sat down to do this show. Steve and I we're working on some other podcasts together, and we would just have conversations briefly about stuff off mic and reference movies and things like that. And in conversation, it came out that we had both read the book about Full Moon, the company, not Empire of the Bees, which is a book that predates that by the same author. But then when Charles Band's autobiography was coming out, we were like, oh man, we should read that too, because it's like there's so many crazy stories of all of this stuff, and he's so prolific. Like, this is going to be an amazing read. And then I think we sort of went, there's probably, this is a deep well. There's probably a show here, for people to sit down and dig into all of these movies where, like you said, Charles Band has had his hands in so many of them. And I was like, I don't really think people have covered a lot of these movies or really devoted the time to analyzing them a lot of these B movies the way they would A movies. And so that was sort of our mission statement, was to do that. And we knew from the beginning, it was like, well, we're not going to have any shortage of material. Like
Right. Yeah.
we'll be doing
Yeah.
the show for years at this rate. And we want to get back in a second, Jeffrey, to introduction to the Dungeon Master there. But real quick, Steve, I know you have some stats about this movie, so why don't you just fire them off real quick, and then we can start talking about the movie and some segments.
Absolutely. So the Dungeon Master, which was also known as Rage War, The Challenges of Excalibrate, or Digital Knights, depending on your market. This was released August 24th, 1984, and it's directed by Dave Allen, Charles Band, John Carl Buechler, Stephen Ford, Peter Manoogian, Ted Nicolau, and Rosemary Turco. And it stars Mr. Jeffrey Byron, Richard Mole, Leslie Wing, Phil Fondacaro, and the band Wasp appears in this movie, which is pretty cool. Yes, this is a movie that has actually come up for us a lot in the show so far. Whenever we do kind of background histories and talk about when people first started working with Charlie Band, a lot of it started here. I think this is the first time that Ted Nicolau got to direct something. This is the first time Peter Manoogian directed something. John Carl Buechler had been the special effects guy, like you mentioned, for Metal Storm and things like that. But I think this is his first directorial effort. And this is also the start of his working relationship with Phil Fondacaro, who works with him to this day. This is kind of an unusual movie. This is a PG-13 movie from 1984 that has nudity in it. I think this must have been one of the very first PG-13 movies. I know the rating came around in 1984, partially as a result of Temple of Doom and Gremlins being just a little bit too violent for a PG. So I think they were probably still kind of dialing in what was permissible in a PG-13 movie. But it's really got that kind of a really striking kind of energy to it. And from what I was reading, it said a lot of the inspiration for this movie came from a combination of like Dungeons and Dragons and Tron, this idea of technology merging with kind of a sword and sorcery sort of anthology idea. And I think that's what's really fun about this. Like it's a pretty seamless anthology. It's not like we're interrupting each segment with like a title card or anything like that. It's the basic plot is that this kind of demonic figure played by Richard Mole comes and targets a computer programmer because he's fascinated by the technology that he is creating, and puts him through basically a gauntlet, which is also something that that's a story structure that's always really struck me. Like anytime if you have some characters like running a gauntlet, I just love that story structure, and I think that works really well here. And basically he's just getting zapped from world to world. And there's a real fun energy to this movie because it feels like every director, and most of them are written by the director, with a couple of exceptions. Jeffrey, you collaborated with your brother on yours. But it feels like everybody kind of gets to bring their own genre, their own energy, their own kind of thing. Like it's not all sword and sorcery segments, like your segment, Jeffrey, is a slasher movie, which is it's literally called Slasher, and it's really different from any of the others, but it really stands out. And then Ted Nicolau got to do kind of a Mad Max riff and like a little post-apocalyptic like car movie. There's a lot of really fun stuff here. And I'm curious, was everybody kind of just given like free reign to just kind of make whatever little movie they wanted as long as it fit into this basic structure?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, it goes back to Charlie Band, and just as I mentioned that, he was very supportive of the people that he knew and worked with, and absolutely gave them free reign. And so, yeah, everybody came up with their own thing, and everybody added their own sort of panache to what they did well. And obviously, I'm thinking especially in the case of Ted's gone on and become incredibly successful in a very specific and is, wonderful and amazing. And John Buechler, God rest his soul, amazing guy and talented. And
one of the greats. Yeah,
one of the greats. And so, yeah, I know. I mean, Charlie, if you look at Charlie collaborates, I mean, look at the long collaboration he had with Tim Thomerson, which of course started with Metal Storm.
With Metal Storm, right?
And so he had this knack of, using the same people as long as all went well the first time.
Yeah.
He would use the same people, over and over again. And Charlie, I'm sure you both know this, but, Charlie comes from, an incredible background about who his father was and
Mm-hmm.
his time in Italy and growing up on sets when he was a little boy. And, his father was very successful in making kind of low budget movies in Italy back, I guess, in the late 50s, early 60s, whatever it was. And he was around when I did Metal Storm, and I met, Albert Band many times. So yeah, no, Charlie was great. Like I said, he was really great about letting people do their own thing, and that's very rare. I mean, a lot of times people get very hands-on and don't let people do their own thing. So he was great that way.
Yeah,
That's
we
amazing.
doing the show, we've kind of come, we've discussed a number of episodes now, and we've talked off mic about other episodes. And really, one of the things that I've grown to love about Charles Band's approach to these movies is he really does carry like a stable of people, and it's not just actors who reprise roles, but like it's crew as well. And like you mentioned, Ted Nicolau, who started editing stuff with Charles Band, and even before his relationship with Charles Band, and then moved on to directing and was given a lot of freedom to take over Subspecies as his baby. And that really became like Ted Nicolau's baby. And then, a lot of these other people, it's just, you keep seeing these names in doing the show. Mac Alberg and John Beekler, these names just keep Peter Manoogian, like these names keep coming up because they just kept coming back, and they kept, being involved in projects that Charlie would propose. And it's just nice. It's just nice to have familiar faces. And you also start to get a sense of like people's strengths and like what they're good at too. And now it's like you can watch a movie you've maybe never seen before and be like, oh, I guarantee you that's a John Beekler creature design. Like you just catch little intricacies. And what I like about this movie is that in each segment you see that they're all different and they're all distinct. And so
like the moment I saw Rat Spit, I didn't need to check who directed that segment. I'm like, all right, that's a Beekler right there. like I love that little guy. And then I mean Dave Allen's segment too is so striking and so like definitely I mean we've really come to love the work of Dave Allen over the course of doing this show, and like and all the stuff that he brings to it. And this one feels especially like Harryhausen-esque, it's got that this big stop motion like stone giant, and it just looks so cool.
Well, it was an homage to Harryhausen. That was the
absolutely
whole reason for that segment. And let me talk a little bit about Mac Alberg, only because he was legendary. I mean, Mac Alberg, long before Charlie Band was a director in Sweden, and but he was a real artist. And with these type of movies where you're working on a shoestring budget, he was able to make the most of everything and make something look. I mean, forgive me for going back to Metal Storm all the time.
No, please.
But, so Charlie, again, being a visionary, decides out of the blue in 1982, whenever it was, that he's going to make a 3D movie. And then obviously he had the pulse because there were two other 3D movies being made at the same time. One was Jaws 3D, and the other one was a film called Space Hunters. And those had significantly larger budgets. And yet, when you go back and look at those three films, Metal Storm has by far, in my opinion, the best look of those three films. And, Metal Storm, I don't know if you know the story of Metal Storm and how Metal Storm was released in 1,500 theaters. Now, that would never happen in a million years, except that Charlie Band, again, being a visionary, right in the middle of production of Metal Storm, Charlie shuts down. So we're all going, oh, maybe we ran out of money. And instead, he goes to the Cannes Film Festival, and he takes me with him. And we go out and do a promotion of Metal Storm to anybody and everybody that wants to see it. And he throws a party for Metal Storm. He has posters of Metal Storm, and he put together a 10-minute reel of Metal Storm. Well, unbeknownst to me, all the folks at Universal were over there, and they knew apparently way beforehand that they had a real bomb on their hands with Jaws 3D. Mm-hmm. So they knew that that film was probably going to have a very short shelf life. And back in that era, just to remind you, gentlemen, that when you had a 3D movie released in a theater, they had to have a special screen. It was called the silver screen. So any distributor of the film was going to be in hardship if they had a movie with a silver screen that wasn't going to play very long. So Charlie very cunningly has a meeting with Universal, and they end up buying Metal Storm for, I think, $5 million. So Charlie immediately pockets a lot of money. You know, when you consider that era, that was a lot of money, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then Metal Storm goes into all the theaters that basically Metal Storm took over for Jaws 3D. And so Metal Storm ended up, I think, grossing in the US about $25 or $30 million, which is a lot for
that's a hit.
A low budget movie,
sure.
Yeah. So that was, again, all the genius of Charlie Van. So and just a quick other note about collaboration. Charlie, as I said, not only did he on the Dungeonmaster, not only did he allow me to write that segment, and then I was able to hire my brother to direct it, but aside from Leslie Wing, every actor in my segment were my friends. These were all people that were in my acting class. So I studied with this very famous acting teacher named Milton Katselis, and he was the famous teacher in LA. He was like the Lee Strasberg of Los Angeles. And so in my class, you know, on any given day was Michelle Pfeiffer and Tom Selleck and James Cromwell and Doris Roberts and Priscilla Presley, and, you know, on and on and on. Wow. So if you recall, in my sequence, there's a scene where the cops put me in the back of the cop car. The two cops, one actor, lovely guy, you wouldn't necessarily know him, but he was a really terrific actor named Eddie Zammit. But the other guy, the guy that was not driving the car, but the other cop,
the one complaining about the donuts.
Yeah, that was Paul Pape. Paul Pape starred in Saturday Night Fever.
So no kidding.
He played one of Travolta's buddies in Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, I recognized him. Saturday Night Fever is one of my favorite movies, which is like not a movie people expect me to like for some reason when they talk to me.
Paul did that cameo as a favor to me, which was really great. And then the guy that played the slasher was a guy in my class, Daniel, and he was very good, I thought, in that role. And but these are all my friends, and this is all because of Charlie. I mean, how many producers would allow an actor to bring in all of his buddies to do that? So
that's great.
Yeah. So let's start talking a little bit about the movie itself. I mean, the movie kind of lays itself out in these segments, so it's pretty easy to talk about kind of individual ones as it goes, so we can kind of break down a little bit of some of the things that happens in this movie. This is a very swift movie. It's like a 74-minute movie in total, you know, so like for all the ground it covers and for all of the different stories that it tells, like it happens very, very quickly. So it just kind of clips along in a really great way. First of all, I think it was pretty striking for a movie made, it was shot in 83, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so it seems to anticipate a lot of the technology that we use today. Like this movie has an early Apple Watch. This movie has early Siri. This movie has early smart glasses. Like all of that stuff is kind of in this movie well ahead of time. So I thought that was really cool how much of this actually anticipated our actual technology.
And we've talked about how Charlie Band was good at anticipating so many different things, like the video stores and home video market, and just being ahead of the curve on so many things. Like, just really, I don't know how he had his finger, you know, not just on the pulse, but ahead of the pulse of so many things, even if it was not, a simplified version of something that we use now. It was like he was so forward thinking,
Yeah,
and
it
it
felt
comes
like
across here.
his curse was that he was too far ahead, like we were talking about. He had opened the first video stores in LA like probably 3 years before VHS really became like a thing for a lot of people. So those video stores didn't really last, but he saw it coming, So
Right.
yeah, he's just kind of a little bit too ahead of it. But yeah, so yeah, like you mentioned, Jeffrey, this opens with this really striking like dream sequence at this military base, and like that's where you really kind of see the Mac Allberg touch sort of shining through. Like he's really great with lighting and like these really kind of dreamy movements through these tunnels.
Oh, the red dress really pops.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So and then we just get this really great flavor of kind of LA around this time, with the aerobics and everything was so cool, and like just the style and everything. And I found it so funny that the character said the running is absolutely crazy. I'm a runner myself. I'm gonna go running after this recording too. So I still hear that to this day. That anytime I tell people that I run, it's just like, oh yeah, that's absolutely crazy. I would never dream of doing that. So glad to see the attitudes have not changed about that. But basically, Jeffrey, your character is a computer programmer who kind of gets sucked into this sort of dream world by this wizard demonic character played by Richard Mall, who is so fun in this movie. He is just like swinging for the fences and going so big and having such a good time with it. And his whole thing is that he's trying to integrate magic with technology, and your character is kind of at the forefront of a lot of these technological things. So what we get basically is a series of vignettes that kind of blend magic and technology in some way or another. It's like he's trying to throw magic at you and you're countering with some kind of technological attack, and so we get a lot of different segments here. The Dave Allen segment is the one with the Stone Giant, the Stone Canyon Giant. And that's I'm going kind of alphabetically here. Charles Band does a heavy metal segment, which is basically just a music video with the band Wasp. John Carl Buechler did the Demons of the Dead. That's where you're fighting a couple of zombies in a cave with rat spit. Stephen Ford, that's your brother, directed Slasher, the segment that you wrote. Peter Manoogian wrote the Cave Beast segment. Ted Nicolau did the Desert Pursuit, and Rosemary Turco did the Ice Gallery, which is the one that kind of brings us into it. Ice Gallery was a very fun one. That struck me as kind of like a Twilight Zone sort of idea of,
oh yeah, you
show up and it's like all these frozen like monsters from throughout history are just kind of being displayed, which is a really fun idea. So I personally, like I mentioned, I loved the slasher bit. I loved the Stone Canyon Giant. Those were probably the two of my favorite ones. But did you have a particular obviously the slasher bit is one that you're probably a little more intimately involved with, but did you have a favorite particular segment, like looking back on this movie now?
Well, of course, the slasher was the best
obviously
one.
The slasher, yeah.
No, let me think about this for a second. The very first one we shot was the heavy metal one, and that was done at the Whiskey A Go Go.
Awesome. Oh, really? That was done right there. Yeah, that's a legendary early spot for heavy metal music.
And we shot that in the middle of the night. We took over the Whiskey A Go Go about 1 o'clock in the morning and shot until dawn. Let me think here. I would say only because I was such a fan that the Dave Allen sequence was my favorite, because I grew up like as a kid, one of my absolute favorite movies of all time was Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah.
So, and it had a lot of stop action, in that film. So I knew what that would, obviously I didn't see it until it was done, but I had a pretty good idea of what it was going to be like. And I just thought that was, that segment in particular was such a tribute to, movies of like the late 50s, early 60s. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. They were all enjoyable. They were all, they all had their own unique, again, I had the advantage of knowing Peter Manoogian was the first assistant director on Metal Storm. Obviously, Beekler was the guy that did all the special effects. I didn't really know Rosemary that well, but her sequence was great. I mean, they all were, fun in their own way. But if I was going to pick my favorite, I would say, taking myself out of the segment that I wrote.
Probably the best way to do that.
I do think that segment was really good. I mean, I thought that segment really.
Of course,
I agree. Yeah.
Held up, and I thought that segment had. That segment actually had a real story to it, and so that part of it, and there was humor in that segment. We tried to bring humor to it, which I thought was good. But no, I thought the Dave Allen sequence was really fun to do, and actually thought it turned out really well. I mean, I mean, it was a ball, and the Ted Nicolaus sequence was done much later. We shut down for a while.
Oh yeah,
did that. God, months and months later, I think it was. So, but it was great. It was really fun. And, what's fun for me, after all these years ago, is that I'm actually really surprised and in a great way, what a following that movie has. When I, flash forward to 2020, when I got approached to do Miskatonic U, the Resonator, and I'll tell you that story in a second, but I was introduced for the first time to the Full Moon Instagram platform. I didn't even know it existed, and there are, I believe, 16 million followers on that platform.
Yeah.
So when it was announced that I was going to be doing Miskatonic U, I was just blown away by all the comments about Metal Storm and about the Dungeonmaster, and that there really was this following, which was very gratifying and yeah, really cool. I mean, I frankly didn't have a clue, so that was great. So.
It's cool to see. I mean, weirdly, I knew about this movie before I knew about it, because I was a fan of Mythbusters, the TV show, where the host of that show regularly quotes this movie, saying that I reject your reality and substitute my own. Like
right.
that gets replayed in a lot of stingers on that show. So I probably heard that line like half a dozen times before I ever knew that it was from this movie.
Yeah.
So I was very excited when I finally heard you saying it on in this movie. I'm like, oh yeah, I know where that's from.
And it's funny. This last summer, I think it was in the middle of the summer, I was invited for the very first time. I was invited to the Texas Frightmare weekend.
Oh, awesome!
Typically, the movies that I was in aren't necessarily that genre, but Arrow was there promoting the box set that Dungeonmaster was in. So they asked that I attend, and I went there, and again, I was kind of a square peg in a round hole. Everybody else there, all the talent there, were from these famous, kind of horror movies. But I was stunned at how many people showed up with Dungeonmaster artwork and Metal Storm artwork, and were quoting those lines, and so that was also a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, that's got to be a totally gratifying feeling, right? Like, it's like you worked on this thing, and not only did you work on it, but you had a good time doing it. You look back on it fondly, and you enjoy telling the stories about your involvement with the project and the people that you worked with. But then you find that it kind of takes on this second life of its own years down the road. Like, that's got to be so much fun to have. Because I mean, I know a lot of people probably look back on stuff they did 40 years ago and think, like, oof, I'm glad I don't do that anymore, or this is a chapter in my life that I'm ready to move past. But it's nice when, something that you enjoyed gets attention, sort of finds a second life like this. So that's got to be awesome.
Yeah, no, it was very gratifying and really fun and very heartwarming. So yeah, it was great.
And that is the real sense that you get when watching this movie, is that it really does feel like everybody's having a good time and just kind of flexing their creative muscles and just kind of just making something sort of off the wall and fun and entertaining. And
if you
that really
wanted
comes
to,
through.
if you wanted to nitpick and talk about narratively sort of the structure of the movie, which, you know, a lot of people, when they watch an A movie, when they watch a B movie, like they're sort of hyper focused on the plot or the narrative beats. You could say, because of the way this is presented, that it could be read as a little bit disjointed, which is fine. I don't like, that's not, I'm not really using that as a criticism of the movie here, because I enjoy it so much. But what I like about it is that watching it now is it almost plays like a reel that all these people are putting together. Like, hey, I'm David Allen, check out this awesome thing that I can do. And like, hey, I'm Ted Nicolau, and check out this thing that I'm doing here. And it's like it's a showcase for the creative talents of these people. And I think it comes across so well that way, because you don't have time, I think, in this movie to get bored or to get tired of what you're seeing. Like, if there's a scene, like the interstitials, I know Charles Band, I believe, directed all the in between segments that, you know, and those are brief and they kind of just guide you. Like, it's almost like, you know, it's Creep Show. They turn the page, it's a comic book page, and boom, then you're in it. You don't even have time to like sit with these things for that long before you're moved on to another completely unique, cool production design or character design or creature design or something like that. And I appreciate that so much about this movie. And watching it, it was just like going from the David Allen to John Buechler. It was like two heavyweights, but who are working on completely different canvases. And so it's just so fun to watch these people just showcasing. Like, it's almost like when you see those competition shows with a bunch of different creatives trying to make something and they all do it slightly differently. That's what this reminded me of. And I just had such a fun time with it and watching what was going to come next, because by the third or fourth segment, you realize, oh, these are all going to be very different from one another. And then we got to Rosemary Turcos and I was like, oh, this looks awesome. And that's a name who I don't know, like John Buechler and David Allen, we say these names all the time, and Ted Nicolau when we do the show. But I was like, oh, this is a person we've never mentioned this person's name on the show before. I know you said you didn't really know her very well, but like, what was it like in just for that segment? Like, how did that all come together?
No, it was fun. I mean, that was, as you mentioned, that segment had sort of a vibe of, you know, Wax of Horrors kind of a thing. And so, but no, she did a really good job. I mean, she did a good job designing the set, and yeah, it was fun. I mean, really, everybody was fun. Everybody, you know, everybody had. I mean, when you're making, you know, ultra low budget movies, it better be fun. because
you can tell when it's not.
You're working under. I mean, by the way, in the wraparound sequences, you know, Paul's apartment, that was my apartment. So,
oh, no kidding.
so, you know, Charlie was like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll use your apartment. It'll be fine. And of course it was fine until they started, you know, filling it up with smoke. Right. so never let anyone ever use your apartment to film, or a house or whatever. But anyway, no, that's the point, is that when you're making a movie, a low budget independent film, you know, it better be fun. Otherwise it's going to be a gigantic drag. And in this case, it was fun. And again, that always starts, you know, at the top. And Charlie was, you know, fun and had a good sense of humor. And we always had fun on the set. We had, you know, my God, the outtakes on Metal Storm alone would make a great movie. I mean, Tim Thomerson and I were just hilarious together. And you know, and yeah, we did bits all the time. It was really fun.
Tim Thomerson has become one of our favorite people to talk about on the show, because we've done a couple transfers in Dollman, and he seems like the best. You know,
I haven't talked to Tim in many, many years, but certainly during that time in my life, and it probably went on for another 10 years, I always remained in touch with him, and we would have lunch or dinner or whatever. And no, he's just an incredible guy, just incredibly funny. but very sweet. And no, he was great. And
Yeah, everyone seems to speak very highly of him for sure.
He's a prince among men. So that was great. And
so you kind of had a unique challenge in this movie too, because you have to be the anchor between all of these very different kind of film styles and like directorial styles and things like that. Did you have to do any kind of special preparation for that, or did you feel any kind of particular pressure to sort of unite it, or were you just kind of going with it?
No, I just went with the flow, you know.
Yeah.
Like, show up and hit your mark and try to keep as much reality as you can. You know, that's the thing about making these kind of movies, is the tricky part is that a lot of times you're acting to green screen, or you're acting to something that isn't there. And so you just have to make it as real as possible. But no, it was a great experience. I had a great time. And it is fun to do a movie like the Dungeonmaster, because it is an anthology. So it's like movies within a movie. And so that was unique and interesting. And before we run out of time, I'll just quickly give you a segue to how all these many years later I ended up doing
absolutely.
So I met a guy named Billy Butler socially. I met him at a couple of screenings, and lovely guy. So one day, out of the blue, Billy Butler calls me and he said, Jeffrey, you know, we've never talked about this, but did you know that I worked on Metal Storm and the Dungeonmaster? I was a PA. And I said, Billy, I had no idea. Sorry, I didn't know. And he goes, well, yeah, I've been with Charlie all these years. And, you know, I was an actor and I acted in his films. And then eventually Charlie gave me an opportunity to direct. And then he educated me on this whole Amazon thing, where Charlie sold all of his backlog to Amazon. And then he has his own channel, the Full Moon channel. You know, I knew nothing about that. I had lost touch with Charlie. I mean, I hadn't talked to him in years. So Billy, as you guys know, wrote this original, I mean, loosely based on Reanimator. And Charlie gave him, because apparently Amazon, after they had bought all the backlogs, said, hey, we'd love you to do some new stuff. So that's how Charlie got the green light to do that. And then Billy, I guess, was hired to write and direct Miskatonic. And so Billy, I guess, runs this by Charlie first and says, you know, the lead guy in Miskatonic U, there's the part to play his father. And, you know, I'm thinking about, what if we hired Jeffrey Byron? And Charlie was like, oh my God, that's a great idea. Let's do it. I hope you would do it, the whole thing. So that's how that happened. So I knew nothing about Charlie and Full Moon and Amazon. And then it all came together. And then obviously my very first day working, Charlie was on the set. That's the first time I'd seen Charlie in probably 30 years. And it was really great to see him, and it was great that they gave me that opportunity. And actually, I think that really turned out well. I thought that was a really fun project, and I thought it had a great look to it. And I thought all the young actors were amazing. And it's too bad they're not doing any more of them. I thought that had a real niche kind of a vibe to it. And but we did 2 episodes right in the middle of COVID, I might add, here in Los Angeles. And then Charlie moved his whole operation to Cleveland. He bought a giant house and then made it into kind of a studio. And then we did the next, 5, I guess there were. I think I was in 3 of the 5 in Cleveland. But so I don't know if that project's ever going to be resurrected or not. But whether it is or it isn't, it was really fun. And that's how I got back into working with Charlie again. So
that's amazing,
fantastic.
Because as someone who loves Reanimator and From Beyond as properties, when I was doing some digging and looking at like what if Full Moon adjacent stuff has been made in the recent years, because one of the things in our show is that we it kind of rides these waves of, like, you have like Empire, where he was kind of hitting the highs of getting these theatrically released movies that were hits. And then you get into then Empire kind of collapsed, and then you get into Full Moon, and you have this sort of classic period Full Moon, where even though they were making these low budget movies, there were some great ideas and they were really making some interesting stuff, and even on small budgets. But then you get into like sort of post-digital, later stage full moon stuff where it's really, really micro budgets they're working on, and some of the stuff is, kind of rough, honestly. And so I was like, I wonder if it's swinging upward again. And when I look back and I saw that there was all this Resonator Miskatonic U stuff, as a person who loves Reanimator and loves Stuart Gordon, I was like, I have to see this stuff, because it looks, from the looks of it, and I'm like, well, I'll save it for when we cover it on the show, but I'm actually kind of tempted to just go ahead and watch it anyway. Just to have it in the, in the back of my mind for when we do tackle all of those. But it just, from what I've seen from the photos and stuff, like, yeah, I think the production design and the color palettes and the way it looks, it's super interesting to me. And I'm excited actually to jump back into those, hopefully soon.
Good. I hope you do, because I think that project turned out really well. So,
well, I'm really excited, and we'll let you go. You've been so generous with your time today, and we really appreciate it. It's been such a treat to talk to you.
My pleasure, and have me back anytime if you want to talk about this genre or anything else. Okay,
we'd love it. Is there anything you'd like our listeners to know about, any projects you've got, or anything you'd like to plug at the moment?
Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the thing that I'm really focusing on right now, and I love to act, and I'll continue to act until I'm 6 feet under. But so my stepfather, but I was very close to him, was a very prolific American novelist named Robert Nathan. He wrote almost 50 novels in his lifetime. And
oh, wow.
During his era, he had 5 of his books made into movies. 2 of them were Academy Award winning movies. The Bishop's Wife, Cary Grant, David Niven, Loretta Young, and Portrait of Jenny, which was a David O. Selznick film. And interestingly enough, it doesn't really connect the dots, but if we're really reaching out here, a lot of his films had kind of a fantasy element to them. They were love stories, but they have kind of a fantasy element to them. So anyway, all these many years later after his death, I inherited the rights to all of his works. So I'm now developing select Robert Nathan novels, and I've got 2 of them that are in advanced development. We have a script on 2 different projects. We have directors on 2 different projects. One is a Hitchcockian thriller. And we always pitch it. It's Where Rebecca Meets Shutter Island. And it's called Stonecliff. And the writer-director, who's a real comer, he's going to be hugely successful, is Osgood Perkins, who is Anthony's son.
Yeah, he directed I've seen a few of his movies, The Black Coat's Daughter, and
he just finished directing Nicolas Cage in Long Legs, which is an original horror film. And in early January, he starts production on a Stephen King short story called The Monkey. And we hope that Stonecliff will be his next slot. And we have a great script. Osgood's a genius. We all think Osgood's going to be the next David Fincher. My partner is the amazing Colleen Camp, who's this fantastic
absolutely
producer. She's known as the director whisperer. She has all the famous list directors.
She's incredible in Clue. Yeah,
she's an all-around powerhouse, and she's my long life. I've known her since I was 17, and she's one of my closest friends, and we're partners on the whole library. So anyway, that's what I'm doing, and knock on wood, the next time that we speak, I'll have a movie in production or a movie in the theater. So
that sounds incredible. That's so cool.
Thank you.
Oh yeah,
guys, thank you so much for your time, and good
thank you, man.
Shoot me an email or a text when this is ready so I can listen to it, and all the above. Okay.
We would love to. We would love to. Absolutely.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time and all the great stories and insight and everything you had, and just the things that you were talking about, and the way you were describing it. I feel like it comes across like Steve and I both had a lot of fun watching this movie and hearing you describe things the way that you did. Well, it didn't really come to me, at least, as a huge surprise. And so it was just nice to be reassured with stories of a pleasant production and fond memories for you. So I'm glad that we were able to have you on to talk about that. If you're a fan of what we do, guys, you can jump on to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this show. Drop us a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. You can follow us on Instagram at @puppetmasters_Castle Freaks. You can follow myself at _Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. You can find the show on X, Threads, Blue Sky, YouTube, and any other various social media platforms if you want to check it out that way. But yeah, more importantly, also just spread the word. If you like what we're doing, tell a friend, and we'll just get keep the audience growing and get a wider fan base out there to appreciate the very dense, vast catalog of Mr. Charles Band. But this is not Steve's only podcast. So, Steve, tell us where listeners can find you if they just can't get enough of your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Cinema Arcade. That's a podcast where we are watching movies and then playing the video games based on them to see kind of where they diverge, where they cross over. It's going to be a lot of fun. And be sure to check in with us next week because we are going to be talking about Jeffrey Combs as Dr. Mordred, a fun little riff on Doctor Strange that I'm looking forward to getting into. So be sure to check out Dr. Mordred next week. And see some great goatee action. I'm really excited to get it. That's really all I know about this movie at this point is I've seen that goatee and it's glorious.
Yeah, this is a fun one. This is a fun one. I've seen this movie before. I enjoy it. I always enjoy a Jeffrey Combs performance. So looking forward to talking about it. And just thank you again to Jeffrey Byron for being so gracious with your time. And listeners, we will see you next week for Dr. Mordred. Stay tuned.
Thank you guys. Much appreciated. Take care.
Take care.